Hello and welcome to MasterMiND. This is Miami New Drama's weekly conversations and classes with great artists and technicians and historians of theater. And today gives me great delight to welcome South Florida theatrical legend and all around an amazing human being who happens to be married to an amazing human being, and he also happens to be the son of at least one amazing human being. I can bet it's two amazing human beings, but of course he's married to Lindsay Corey, who's an actor that has performed all around South Florida, including twice at Miami New Drama, and it's a delight to work with her. And your father has worked with us also, and quite a bit throughout South Florida. He's also a radio legend. But we're not talking about them. We're talking about you today. And Matt has an extraordinary amount of work in South Florida as a sound designer, from practically every single play that Gablestage did from 2005 on, to being in residence with our good friends at Theater Lab and also at Zoetic Stage. And, because he's such a freaking mensch, he's the president and CEO of Inside for the Blind, where they read books and magazines. An army of volunteers do that. Of course, with COVID, those volunteers have really been just you and your wife probably. But I just want to put some light on that work you do, because
thank you.
It's clear that you're a great professional, but I think that this shows that you are just a great human being, and that is, after all, what life is about. So, Mr. Corey, it's a pleasure to welcome you, and let's go and let's talk about sound design, my friend.
Awesome. Well, that was like the best introduction I've ever gotten anywhere, so I appreciate that. And I agree about my pop and Lindsay, and also my mom too. So I don't think she's listening, but I'll still shout her out.
She can share the YouTube video of this conversation. By the way, it's a good moment, to say that all of our conversations live in our archives, and we have extraordinary archives. I suggest, if this is your first time coming to this class, to check out our classes on Greek theater, on Shakespeare and Chekhov. Those were outstanding classes that I'm extremely excited about. And all of them are available at colony.org on our archives. You go to MasterMiND and to archives. And the way this conversation is going to work today is that we're going to, talk for a while. You're going to have a presentation that I'll try to guide a little bit. And then at 12, we're going to open it up for questions for about another 30 minutes. So that is, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A button below. You can also, comment things in the chat, but we appreciate if all the questions are in the Q&A, and then we'll get to the questions at some point in this presentation. So without further ado, Mr. Corey.
Oh, wow. Okay, awesome. So I'll say first, I think part of the reason I got involved in sound design in the first place was so that I could compose music. I thought there was a sound designer at Gablestage before me named Mike Hoffman. And when I went down there and I saw 2 shows in a row that he designed, I thought the sound design was cool, but I was like, where did he get this music from? It sounded like, like a movie score. And it turns out he was writing as well as doing the sound design. He was composing for the plays. So that was my first foray into sound design, was at Gablestage, and he had already kind of set this tradition there that he would compose incidental music. So I find out later that it's supposed to be 2 different things. The sound designer isn't necessarily a composer. So for a long time, I just kind of had the 2 melded in my head, and I think I was probably doing sound designers a disservice and composers a disservice by doing both for the same rate. But you know, living,
Producers love it, my friend.
I know they do. Yeah, we live and we learn though. So they're not the same job. So it's not necessary for a sound designer to have a background in music, even though that's my background. So for today's purposes, I guess we'll stick mostly to sound design proper for straight plays. I don't do a lot of big musicals. It's more of just a kind of a wheelhouse thing. Like I'm not a nuts and bolts sound designer like some are that are really quick and adept at programming a board for different scenes of actors, and that's not really my strong suit. So I try to not work in that realm as much as possible. We will talk a little bit about underscoring, which uses music to create a mood in a play. And if there's any questions about composition, I'm happy to answer those at the end. But I'm wondering, for you, a lot of directors that I work with, one of the first things that they talk about is the world outside of the play, and I think that's one of the things that a sound designer really can help with. We can tuck speakers off stage and create a world outside of the play. Is that something that you rely on a sound designer to do?
You know, it's a great question. And in fact, to answer that, I need to just open up a little bit of a window about my personal philosophy of theater. I think that in American theater, there is a love for creating a reflection of what life is like. So, many of the work I've seen you've done a great job. They're always in like, it's a living room, and then you create a world outside the living room. And I think that has become really, I mean, it's hard, fish don't know they're in water, but really it's an American phenomenon. I think, for me, for my sensibilities, I think that theater is, something much more plastic. There's a plasticity of theater. We've done about 18 productions or so. I think maybe 3 or 4 of them have had 4 walls. Most of them are, direct address to audience. And so I rely on sound design to, and I also love to be in 100, not 100, but, in 15, 20 different places in one play, and not keeping it. And I do rely on sound to create that world. If it's a busy street, you just have somebody, trying, with sound and a human being and some light, you can, the audience will do the rest. The audience is the one who,
right.
Sound, it's a street, somebody's trying to cross and it's afraid. Oh, so there must be cars going by fast. So I actually love where that work is done in the mind of the audience. So you see how, just to respond to your question, I have to.
So you would almost have the sound designer make some suggestions and then let the audience fill in the blanks with their own imagination.
I'm not going to change the whole set. I'm not going to. I think that audience are smarter than that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's, you're right. There is a trend in a lot of new plays to set like a two-hander in an apartment, and you have the practical TV, you have the doorbell, you have the toilet flushing, the phone ringing, like all of those things now, it seems like half of the plays are in that kind of setting.
More. And in the plays produced in South Florida, even more so, I think.
Yeah. So I guess it makes sense because at Gablestage, there were a lot of realistic sets and realistic settings. The very first play I worked on there, Brooklyn Boy, I remember very specifically, this is kind of a funny story. It was literally my first professional show that I sound designed. And I didn't have a library of effects yet. And in one of the scenes, it's a hotel room. And it's right there in the script that the girl goes to the bathroom, flushes the toilet, comes back. I didn't have a toilet flush sound effect, so I recorded my toilet here. I laid that in. As it turns out, it's it's a high scale, you know, hotel with on the penthouse or whatever, and mine's got the janky chain and the ball cock and all that stuff. So within a half a second of hearing that flush, Adler freaks out and says, "What the fuck?" And so he goes, "What kind of toilet is that? Is that a toilet in a crack house? What is that?" So I knew this is actually leading to something. I knew at that point I needed to be a little bit more careful about my effects, my practical sound effects. And so that's one of the first tips I would give to anyone starting out is I know that the temptation is out there with the internet to Google toilet flush sound effect. And then you click on the first one or maybe the second or third one. You, ultimately, you want to gather as many really good effects as you can and kind of curate them for yourself so that you don't have to go through this every time, but be very discerning about those effects because even now I'll sometimes be watching a play that I've designed and I want to you know wring my own neck for lack of a better term because there's an effect that made it in that just isn't quite aurally good enough. It may be, you know, it may have been good as a placeholder or whatever, and the first 10 times I heard it, it was good enough. And then that 11th time you go, oh, that's not really a great effect. It doesn't sound realistic or whatever. So that is something I had made a note of to say is to be very conscious of the quality of those effects that you get online. If you're not going to roll your own effect and record your own, just there's a very variable quality of effect out there. So for things like that, to be very discerning or you'll hate it later. The play I wanted to talk about today was, I think would be a good one to do a little bit of a demonstration on would be Of Mice and Men. There's so many great opportunities in there for a sound designer, and it was written at a time when, you know, it was probably a lot more difficult to achieve some of these effects that are a little bit easier now. So, you know, maybe we could put it out to the participants. What kinds of a question? What kind of sounds would you expect to hear in Of Mice and Men? You know, it's set in a rural location. Um, what do you what as a participant, anyone that's familiar with it, what do you think
Right.
you
Or
would
you might be
expect to
familiar
hear?
with the novel, which was the basis of the
Right.
play. So if you might be familiar with crickets, so Mahama
Oh
Kane.
my gosh, absolutely crickets. Yes. Crickets are another one. I probably have now 15 different effects of crickets, and I actually have a demonstration. I have a really poor cricket sound effect that I have. So I'm going to play one that I like and then one that I really hate.
Start with the one you hate first. Could we start with the one you hate so that we understand why we hate it?
Yes. Okay. Here it comes. Okay, do you hear all the like the it's just like there's so much background noise in that. It's almost impossible to get that out. This is one that I like. There's some frogs in there. And then this is another one I like. This one's great. And the other thing that's funny, sometimes you get a really good effect that um that loops in a weird place so that like maybe you have an ambient scene like that that has a bird in it. And if you make the loop too short, it's to, you know, to cover the length of the scene, you hear this damn bird over and over and over, and it almost becomes rhythmic and you can predict where it's going to happen. That's a no-no. You definitely want to.
Distracting. You know, if sound design distracts you from the scene, then there's a sound design problem.
A problem for
We're
sure.
storytellers, right? And so every discipline is telling one part of the story. You know, as I was listening to the crickets, it's interesting how sound really also places you in a specific place. Crickets in Venezuela, my home country, sound different.
Absolutely.
the US. They're different kinds of crickets. So, you know, I hear that crickets and I know that it's not of an, you know, I know that I'm not in Venezuela.
Yes.
The same way that if you hear that, I mean, I'm not going to do it. I'm not, but they sound different. And if I hear them, I'm transported to that specific place. So that's the magic really of storytelling sound, right?
Right. Okay. So you have your crickets, mostly at night. We use crickets a lot because it's easy, and if you get the level right, it's unobtrusive. In the daytime, you would have maybe some horse effects. So I'm going to bring some in for the project later. Maybe a cow, because it's, you know, in a barn, you might have a cow, you're going to have dogs, maybe a coyote, a rooster, all of these things you might have at some point in this tableau of mice and men. So the first thing you might do is gather all of those together. And then what is that? Does anyone know what it's called when you have all of these individual effects and then you work them all together to create one sound that you hear?
Do we have anyone?
Anybody? All right. Well,
Layered effect, says Amy.
yeah, good guess. It's what we would call, probably in sound design, we'd call a soundscape.
Sounds good.
So that's kind of the broad term for all of the sum of these effects. So later, when we get to that, I'm gonna share my screen and I'll show you how we would layer these effects to make a soundscape for a play like this. But there's a couple other things before we get there. I was talking about being selective. Here's another one. So there's all of these atmospheres that you can find online. So there's something called a country atmosphere. That sounds perfect for Of Mice and Men, right? There, some of them are very good. So here's a good one. Sounds like daybreak. Very subtle. There's not a lot of noise. Lovely. Okay, in the same library, here's another country atmosphere. Like, it sounds like a white noise machine to me. I don't know what you could ever use that for, video, film, whatever. There's no use for that effect. So that just goes back to kind of being discerning. But the other thing about that is the perspective of the sound. A lot of times, if you're looking at a painting, one of the first clues that you get when you look at a painting, as to whether or not the painting is any good, is if the perspective is right. You know, does it make sense? If are the shadows right? Is the perspective of the building right? And with sound, it's the same way. If we don't convey the proper perspective of the sound, that can also be something that's confusing for an audience. For example, rain effect, which is a notoriously difficult effect to achieve well on less than great speakers, because that a lot of times rain ends up sounding like white noise.
White noise, right?
But you do have the recording of rain from the outside, like when you're in a rainstorm, and you also have the sound of recorded rain from the inside, where you hear it hitting a roof or hitting an awning or dripping down the side into like from a gutter, where you have all of those sounds layered into it. So if we're meant to be in the rain outdoors and we're hearing raindrops hitting a roof, that's not the right perspective. So I have a couple of examples of this here too. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, does everyone see that? Did it work, Michelle?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So for perspective, okay. So here's a good general rain sound effect, which you can kind of use for whatever. There's a little thunder laid in.
And the perspective of this, you think it's somewhere, the rain is happening outside somewhere, right? It's
It,
not a
yeah. Now this one could be either, depending on the level.
better volume. I see.
Yeah, so if you get the level right, this one, that's kind of why I have this one called general rain, because it's not really giving away the perspective too much. So if you're working with only two speakers and you don't have a lot of control, something like that would be a good effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one is definitely from an interior perspective, and I think you'll agree that it sounds a lot different.
Okay.
So
I'm
you
glad
can hear
I'm
it.
sheltered somewhere. There's a feeling of good. I'm sheltered, right? It's not.
Exactly. That's
It's not
exactly right.
right. It's not happening in.
So if you hear this sound and you're supposed to be in a forest, it's a little confusing. Like it doesn't make as much sense. So there's little things like that. They're not all created equal, and you have to be, you know, you have to make sure that you're conveying the right perspective to the audience too. And here's one with wind. I love this second effect here. So wind is another one that's kind of tricky, especially when the script says something like you hear a gust of wind. Well, wind doesn't just like gust and stop. Like you need to have a bed of wind for that gust to make any sense, unless it's a completely surreal, unnatural kind of play you're doing. But realistic wind is kind of tricky. So I like this one. It sounds windy, but it's natural. But if you're inside, you generally don't hear all those high frequencies of wind. If anyone has lived through a hurricane down here, you get more of that real.
And if you haven't, it's because you just moved into Miami.
Yeah, we still have a month too. Um, that particular sound is very specific. I don't know if that's translating very well. It's pretty
I
low.
can't hear it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
for some people, you won't really hear it because it's meant to be felt. That's
right.
a sound that I would send almost exclusively to a subwoofer so
So.
that you would feel it as opposed to actually hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that would convey the interior perspective. You're inside, you're sheltered, as you said, and that's the wind like rushing by the building. So those are just a couple of examples of perspective as it applies to sound. Another good one for that that you have to do a lot as a designer would be in a car. So here's a couple of just real quick examples of that. Oh shoot, sorry, I had the sound down. Let me skip to this one. The interior perspective of a car being started.
Nice.
But that's through the windows and through the doors and everything. It's more of a rumble. And then the exterior perspective.
I can see that one is a Ford Fiesta, right, and so I guess if you in the same way that there are different types of toilet, a Porsche or
Yes,
it sound very different being turned on than a Ford Fiesta, right?
100%. And if you're in a rural setting, you want to make sure that it's you have a truck if you need a truck and not a sports car or a Harley or something. So there's just little things. Those are pretty obvious things that we think about a lot. But getting back to Of Mice and Men and putting together this soundscape, I'll just show you how this might look a little bit. Um, so here's what I have for a speaker diagram. And I saw Amy Rauschberger chimed in. She's going to laugh because I've never done a speaker diagram this nicely before for anybody except for you guys now. So now I have one. Here we have the stage. Here we have the main speakers. Here we have the audience. Here we have the rear speakers. These are offstage speakers, which you can pipe sound to give the idea of distant sound. You have a subwoofer for low frequencies, and then I just put a practical speaker. This could be a speaker for a telephone or whatever. But of Mice and Men, I don't recall having to use a practical speaker on the stage. But if you have a channel, sometimes you just like to set it out there in case you get an idea later. So now that you have, you know, kind of a palette of sounds to play with, you would then have them all in your QLab file here, and then you would try to kind of map them to the different speakers. So the crickets, maybe you want the crickets behind the audience. I have 5 and 6 rear here. I would just kill all of these other faders except for 5 and 6. And that would allow that sound to come just from the rear speakers of the audience. I maybe would put the horse over in offstage right, which is number 4. So you can see it's not really treacherous to do this now with the tools that we have available to us. It's pretty simple to do all of this. And unfortunately, I can't play the surround sound effect over the speakers. We're only dealing with stereo through Zoom. And just by me taking out 1 and 2, now you won't hear anything for the crickets because we're listening through 1 and 2 on Zoom. But then you have your horse effects, some crazy cows, dogs, coyote. Oh, I brought the volume down on the coyote. The one thing that I'll demonstrate, this is a very powerful program, and most theaters are now using this particular program. If you have multiple effects in one file, QLab allows you just to kind of highlight the one that you want to use. So it used to be where I'd have a million different files, Coyote 1, Coyote 2, Coyote 3. Now you can kind of have them all in one place and audition them quickly. Quickly, right? All right, well, forget the coyote. It's a great effect. And the sum of these would all create that soundscape of Mice and Men. So you might consider grouping them together and calling that a soundscape. Scene 1. And then they all would play together. You can time this out. All of these options here where my mouse is allow you to stagger the, you know, when they're played, for how long they're played, what speaker they're played. And you can get a good sound designer can get a soundscape going in the space in probably 5 minutes. And at that point, it's just tweaking, and then you wait for the actors, and you can see where it's needed to either add or subtract stuff. I'm going to go back. Did the screen share go away?
Yep, we're seeing you.
Okay, so that's just a little bit about QLab and how that process goes. There's a couple of other things to consider. For me, when I'm doing a soundscape, I don't like to just like to fade it in and fade it out. It's a little more slick if you can start a soundscape with a good strong effect so that it has a clear start, and then you can fade it or dip it or whatever you want at the end. But I like to punctuate the beginning of it. So maybe for this soundscape of Mice and Men, I would start it with a rooster, you know, something that has a very strong start so that the sound just isn't kind of like washing in out of nowhere. That doesn't make any sense to me usually. So that's one tip. There's other things that you can do too with your soundscapes. Like, for example, something in the rain soundscapes that happens a lot is you get some very good thunder effects, but they all sound the same if depending on how they were recorded, they sound like they were recorded with the same perspective. And if you want to have a distant storm that's approaching, you might use equalization to take the high frequencies out of some of those thunderclaps so that they sound more distant. And as it gets closer, it's not just getting louder, but the quality of that sound is changing too, so that it's a little bit more realistic.
You know, now that you're speaking of thunderstorms, I just want to give a quick comment on how very smart playwrights know how to write imagining sound. And I'm going to talk about Chekhov, was one of my favorite ones out there. There's a scene in Onkovania where Chekhov's, where Vanya tries to make a move on not on Sonia, on oh man, what's the professor's wife's name? Oh man, bad on me. And I just directed on Vanya last one. But anyways, he's Vanya after that failed attempt, he's there alone. And throughout the whole second act of Uncle Vanya, we hear that a storm is coming. Everybody's talking about that storm coming. And then when Uncle Vanya is alone is the moment that the storm comes. And then he's talking to us, the audience. And in theory, the storm needs to go louder and louder and louder. So for him to talk to us, he needs to scream for us to hear him, because there is the sound of a storm. And that moment is magical, where, you know, sound design almost plays a trick on the actor, but in reality, they're all coming together to heighten a moment, and it's, you know, as good as theater gets.
That's a great point. And sometimes you have you saw it pop up there? Yeah, sometimes we have effects that, or I say maybe it's just me, but sometimes I'll have an effect that I don't really love, and I'll play it in tech, and the actor's reaction to the effect is so good that it sells the poor or mediocre sound effect, because they made it more realistic than it sounds by how they react to it. And that's something exactly
the audience did. That the audience put together a sound plus a reaction, and in their mind was like, yep, we buy it.
Right. It didn't take them out. Whereas you're alone and you hear it in an empty theater with no reaction, you go, oh, that doesn't sound very realistic. It's not even coming from the right place. So that's a very important thing. And I experienced that with the storm at the end of, I think it's Act 1 of Night of the Iguana. There's a hurricane, and that particular storm is one that builds, and it's a long scene. And you have to be really, really careful to pace that properly so that you're not overwhelming the actors too soon. But when they have to actually overcome the sound of the speakers, it's so great, because that's what would happen. Or if you're in a crowded restaurant and the actors have to lift their volume a little bit to talk over the sound of the din of the restaurant, like all of that, like really helps everything be more realistic and slick. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover on Soundscapes. There's two other little things. One thing that gets done a lot, and it's probably challenging if you're not used to doing it, is in these smaller plays, you almost inevitably, there will be some point you'll have to record a voiceover, whether it's someone from the other room shouting that, you know, isn't really there, or a fake commercial, or you know, any number of things. Even if it's just a curtain speech, you might be required to record that for the director so that they don't have to give it live every night. This can be you know, kind of terrifying if you don't have the right equipment. Right now we're like in the best age of technology ever for recording things. I mean, things that devices that cost $100 now, well, you could make an album on them. So we don't have an
Podcast. Like 35% of all males now have a podcast.
Oh yeah, I have a podcast.
There
It's
you go.
called Behind the Screen. I hope you will all tune into it. It's
Yeah,
about orchestral
yes,
auditions.
and Claudita can maybe put that information for us so that we can log into.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So, yeah, exactly. It's so easy to record right now. So we don't have the same excuse anymore. Uh, oh, I don't have a great equipment. It's going to sound raunchy. If you have a phone, you can do a decent voiceover recording. You just have to be aware of a couple of things. So I'm going to explain. If all you have is a phone to record a voiceover, um, I have some examples. I'm going to go back to the shared screen. Okay, so I did this yesterday. Is it there, Michelle?
Yep.
Okay, I don't trust this because I I never do this. Okay, so over here we have voiceover one bad. I did this yesterday. I just set the phone down. I was about 2 feet away in my living room, which has tile and a hard ceiling. Okay, this is an example of a really poor recording in a room with tile floor and a hard ceiling, and I'm too far away from the microphone. Okay, so it's not even the worst recording.
It's not that bad at all. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't hear any noise from the outside really. You hear a little bit of like this part, you can see it is
Right.
hum. Like I'd want all that to be gone with silence.
Right.
But even if you get rid of it, okay, this is an example of a really you still hear the noise recording.
Is there a way to like close in on that noise and eliminate it throughout the entire clip? Is that
yes, I actually that's what I wanted to show you. That when I say we're living in the best time for audio, I'm really not joking. There's all sorts of software that you
great
can
time
use.
for audio, terrible time for democracy, but let's go on.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a program, it's called Isotope RX7. There's various versions, there's student bundles of this where you can do anything. You can automate taking breaths out of recordings. You can take the mouth clicks out of recordings. You can also take this horrible background noise out. So I've done that with one. And this is the same recording. I've processed it. You can see now that there's not as much junk there. Now listen to it. Okay, this is an example of a really poor recording in a room with tile floor and a hard ceiling, and I'm too far away from the microphone. Okay, it's better, right?
You photoshopped it.
It's exactly what it's like. It's like Photoshop for audio.
Yeah.
However, the more that you do this, the more you'll start to hear the artifacts that processing does. It's definitely better. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, they might be like a little bit more robotic. Like it might be a little bit more. No, there's something less human about it, but barely so. No.
Right. Now, this is something that, given the two options, I would use this one because I think this is better.
It's better.
It's definitely better, but I hear artifacts that I would still not be happy with this recording. So the tricks are this. When you are faced with an emergency recording and all you've got is your phone, and even if you do have a microphone, these tips kind of apply. You can't get close enough to the microphone. You want to get as close as you can get to that microphone without popping peas. With a phone, you're going to take it and you're going to like almost kiss it like this. And then just put it off to the side so that you're not blowing the air right onto the microphone. And better yet, if you can set it down on something and so that you don't have to hold it, you're going to be far better off too, because then you won't get the thuds of your fingers. Even if you just move a little bit, it's going to make thuds in the sound. So this is my same my same phone. I did these back to back. I went into a room that has a rug, not my studio, but I went into a room that has a rug, and I lowered my voice a little bit and took the microphone closer to my face. Okay, this is an example of having the that was take one. Sorry, you weren't supposed to hear that. This is a better scenario where I'm in a room that has some absorption, has a carpet, it has a higher ceiling, and I don't have to speak as loud, so you shouldn't hear as much echo. I also have the microphone much closer to my face, just a little bit off axis, so I'm not popping my P's. Okay, so I had it.
Trained ear, that is professional.
Right, and that was with an iPhone. So with a little bit of care, you can use your iPhone. You just have to try to mitigate. The big thing are those reflections. When you have that microphone even a foot away or a foot and a half away, it's too far. You need to get that thing right up close to your face. Don't talk as loud so that your voice isn't echoing off the walls. And that's with zero processing. Absorption has a carpet. It has a higher ceiling. All this stuff in here is, it's nothing. It's super easy to edit, and you have a good sounding recording. On the topic of voiceover recording, real quick, if you're doing this for a living and you need a microphone, at some point the phone thing is going to fail you and you're not going to want to use a phone anymore. I highly recommend, I'm going to show you. There's a $60 microphone. It's called Samson Q2u. This microphone here is a USB microphone. It's also a XLR microphone. So if you're using it with your laptop or if you're using it with a professional mixing board, it doesn't matter. You're going to be able to use it with both.
Nice.
If you're using it for Zoom, your headphone plugs right into the bottom of the microphone. For $60, you'll sound, this is a $350 microphone that I'm using now. You'll sound the exact same. It's that good. There's been a run on them because they're so good. But Samson Q2u, the key is that it's a dynamic microphone and not a condenser microphone. A lot of podcasters and sound designers are, you see this one, it's called a Blue Yeti. It's almost this ubiquitous podcasting microphone. It's a great sounding microphone if you're in a good room, but it's super sensitive, and most of us aren't in a perfect environment when we record. So you want something that's not going to pick up, the ants on the counter. And the super sensitive microphones are a no-go. Look for a dynamic microphone when you're getting your USB microphone, and you're going to be in much better shape. And they'll be cheaper. So that's a little tip.
Claudia,
and
that information in the link, so you can click and see the details for yourself.
And also get yourself a pop filter. That'll take care of most of your plosive stuff. And especially if you're working with people that don't work with microphones all the time, they may not be aware of it, and they're just popping everything right on top of it. It helps with people that don't have a perfect microphone technique. Is there any questions so far?
Well, I think we should probably try to save the questions for after the.
Okay.
I see the question, but I don't think they relate necessarily to what we're talking about right now. So.
Okay, good.
If there is something that relates to this particular issue, let us know now. If not, we'll save those questions for later.
Gotcha. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about underscoring.
Mm-hmm.
I was putting together this list of notes of things that I wanted to talk about, and I wrote Matt's rules of underscoring, and I realized I never had rules of underscoring. That's like such a pretentious thing to say.
No, it's not. And I think underscoring is a very delicate, I have my thoughts on it. I'll share it afterwards.
Okay.
But I want to hear what is Matt's rules of underscoring.
My rules of underscoring. Okay. I never had them until yesterday, so I haven't codified this yet, but maybe we can work through it together. Maybe I'll add a rule and call it Michelle's rule. Okay. So the first one is try not to underscore without an assist from your lighting designer.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense to you?
It always has to be collaborate. It always needs to come together, light and sound, to create a moment. I
Right.
what you mean. Yes.
Yeah. So it's really, really weird when you're watching a play and an actor starts a monologue and then bang, music out of nowhere.
Right.
And nothing shifts, nothing changes. You're just like, what am I hearing? And oftentimes to get the level right, it has to be kind of low. So sometimes you're, if especially if you're not sitting near the speakers, you hear something and it almost sounds like a mistake. You're like, it could be a ringtone or something, and it's actually underscoring. So whenever you can in those moments, try to coordinate with your colleagues and the director and make a little bit of it can be so subtle, but any sort of light shift helps set that moment up
Hmm.
for an underscore. Makes it feel less like a mistake.
So it's a whole queue of the other disciplines. What's the second rule?
Okay,
Second
the second
one.
rule, and it's probably a sub rule of rule one, is try to bring the music in during a pause in the dialogue and let it establish a little bit before that underscored moment starts, because that way you can bring in the music a little bit louder and let people know that this is what you're doing, and then you can dip it down to the lower level, but it's established so people can kind of you're helping them with the convention that you're using, because underscoring is not natural. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Okay, because yeah, if the music is too low, that is also disruptive, to me. So that's rule number two.
Third
And
command.
then the third commandment, and this is the final commandment really, is don't overstay your welcome. Less is more when you're underscoring in the theater. It's not a movie. It's much harder to mix in the live theater than it is if you're doing a film. So use it sparingly and try not to compete with the words.
Right. And do you, when you do an underscore, do you try for the sound to be mimicking the emotion that is taking place? Do you try to have that sound or that music be in opposition to the temperature? How do you like to approach that?
Wow, that's an awesome question. Yeah, I mean generally you want it to support the emotion, so it shouldn't be too far off of the heart of the text. Um, but a lot of times, it just doesn't work. You can tell in 4 or 5 seconds when you're underscoring if it doesn't work. No matter what volume, no matter how you place the cue, like you can tell right away when it just mashes with what's being said. A lot of times it's tempo. If the actor's speaking quickly and it's that kind of a speech, the music does have to be either rhythmically in the same vein or without rhythm so that it's not competing. So a lot of times, well, this is a trick that I probably overuse, but I like drones in for underscoring. I like just sound, like a bed of low frequency sound, because it doesn't compete with dialogue ever. And you can turn it up louder than you would music, something that had percussion or a guitar.
Yeah.
Guitars live in the same frequency range as speech, so it's difficult to turn those up as long as you'd like to, or as high as you'd like to, without competing with the voice. These low frequency drones will support just about anything. So I have some here. I'll play a couple of them just so you know what I'm talking about. This is my favorite thing to do, and if you've seen any play that I've worked on, you've probably heard all of these already. Let me share it. So this is kind of like a windy drone,
Yeah.
and you
It's
can
cool.
see like this is
Atmosphere.
gonna go forever. It adds tension. It adds mood. It's kind of generic, but it's probably a little more on the eerie side. This one's definitely eerie. You won't hear the rumble on your speakers at home, but this has a very distinct rumble in it. So these are all just like, you know, some favorites of mine that I've used numerous times. I like using these to underscore much more than using
Music.
actual music.
And I'm there with you. You know what? I'm going to stand up and turn on the lights. I realize I didn't do it. So I'm in the darkness here. And probably people are seeing me pixelated. So just give me a second with all the embarrassment in the world. Good. This must be better. All right.
Okay. Now, how do I unshare this again?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I'll tell you my commandments on underscore.
Okay.
One commandment. Don't do it.
No, I like that. That's funny. That would be a great number 4 for me. Just don't do it.
Listen, here's how I see it. I think that underscore works well in film because that's the medium. I think in theater, I don't like the pretend part of theater. I think the theater is at its best when we all know that we're in it together. We know that that's not a real kitchen and that's not a real. So I like sound a lot. Underscoring tries to manipulate the audience in a way that people like Bertolt Brecht would punch you in the face, right? Because the whole thing of theater, it's more Houdini than David Copperfield. Like Houdini is going to tell you, like, I'm not a magician, but I'm going to do something and you have no idea how I'm going to do it. But it's an illusion. It's not magic, right? And I think the theater works best when we are Houdini than we are, I'm going to make the Statue of Liberty disappear. I did it, magic. But I don't know how David Copperfield, but I assume that he's maybe there's a better example than him. But you know what I mean? Like, I like, when we come in and we know that we're all actors, we know that we're on stage, but still we're going to impress you. And I think that underscoring, creates this ventures in the world of melodrama a little bit.
It can, for sure.
I think that the examples that you showed are perfect, are great. Like, and listen, I'm now going on into a new project in the fall that it's not on theater. So maybe I'll underscore a lot of it because maybe that is what that medium wants. But in theater, I feel that it doesn't really support. There are some examples. There's amendments to my constitution, which is they do work in musicals, because in musicals that world creates. That world exists. You go and you sing a song, and then when those themes come back, they come back in an underscore, in dialogue. So I think that totally fits that world.
They're completely exempt from these commandments. Yes.
And I guess that's it. I guess that's it. But the more we can distance ourselves from film, I think that the better. But yeah.
Well, if you really feel like there's I think a lot of times directors use them because they feel like the material isn't interesting enough. And maybe not the whole play, but maybe there's just a long static section where there isn't really an opportunity to do much with lights or with blocking, and it's just words. And they feel like maybe we could punch it up a little bit if we did some underscoring to support it. It would be a little ear candy for the audience, and it helps break up a very long static scene. And what I would say to that is maybe you can do something with the outside world and have an effect. Maybe it's rain, maybe it's wind, or it's traffic, or something naturalistic from the outside that you can bring in and get rid of to kind of help in those moments. That's all I would say.
Yeah, I understand directions, but I feel that everything needs to be, it's the story. Like, everything needs to be there to help tell a story. And we have to help tell a story without manipulating the audience experience. I think that that is kind of like, you want to, you want the audience to tell a story that they are the ones, putting it together in their minds. The moment you underscore, you are editorializing how
Yes.
the story should. And I think that that is just, for me personally, for my theatrical philosophy, it's just, first commandment. But anyhow, you are really, it seems from this conversation, you're not a big fan of underscoring, other than with those, changing the atmosphere in a way that you would change it in the light cue, because the sound cues that you're showing are really more like a light cue change, because they don't feel like you're trying to manipulate too much. They change a little bit the atmosphere, but they're not trying to Mickey Mouse, the action. So
Right. It's tricky. It's ultimately, as a designer, you do have to accept what the director wants to do, and if they want to underscore something with music, then it's up to you to make that work and advise as best you can. But a lot of times you're not going to be able to just say, no, I don't want to underscore there. You have to figure out something to do. So that's where I think it's a good idea to have that stuff talked about early on, especially if you're composing. You want to make sure that you don't compose in the complete wrong vein and then have to redo work. But also you want to, I think it's been my experience with underscoring that usually you start with a big chunk and then you narrow down to a much smaller chunk that's underscored, and then maybe it goes away, in the process. So
my second amendment is, transitions are okay. And I think that is kind of where I think that the music really can help tell the story, especially in the type of theater I like, where there's like 25 scenes, and we're in different places. And music is that thing that conducts it and helps us put together and helps change the mood from one scene to the other. And the beauty of it is when the music and the sound design are combined at the end of a cue, right? So like a music comes in and a sound of a waves, and at one point the two of them are dancing together, and then they leave. I think that is
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, I agree. So the last thing I'll say, and it's taken me a long time to get over of Mice and Men, because when I designed it, I want to say it was I think it was probably 2013 or 2014, on opening night. It was a beautiful production. It was impeccable. Everything, all the technical elements are great. Up until the very end, it's the last soundscape. It's when they're looking for Lenny, and it's reaching the conclusion. And I heard something looping artificially. Like, I had a long bed of like guys shouting and dogs barking and sniffing and coming through the bushes, and you could hear it all around in surround sound. But I heard something artificially looping that sounded like something was stuck. And I got really kind of nervous, because I'm like, wow, I know I didn't program that. As it turns out, the sound computer froze and it got caught in a loop. So that particular sound couldn't be faded out. So abruptly, that soundscape stopped. And then it gets to the gunshot, puts the gun out.
What?
Nothing happened. There was no sound. Lights just went down. Boom. The computer had frozen, so we didn't get the last. And we had slaved over that last moment too. The gunshot was kind of heightened. It wasn't super realistic. We finally had one that worked, that we liked, and it was a very cool way to end the piece. But it was kind of devastating that it ended that way. The actor was in light for probably 2 or 3 seconds longer than he should have been, so it was really weird. And I think people ultimately thought it was a choice, but it was a really, really bad technical snafu on opening night. So that's my experience. I hope one day I get to design that show again, so that I can, you know, have it go well on opening night.
You know, I hear you. Guns are such a trick. You know, we started the play Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy, written by Billy Corben and Oren Squire, started with a Mac 15 shooting like 32 bullets in a second. And, you know, audiences were talking, and then without, you know, anesthesia,
Oh,
and
wow.
and that's exactly how the play wanted to start. And we recorded the sound of it, and it sounded fake, and it wasn't the effect. And, you know, somebody like me, I would say, like, you know what, yeah, we move on. But Billy was really adamant that that effect needed to be there, that if it doesn't sound real, then the play doesn't work. And, you know, you don't want to be in the losing end of a conversation with Billy Corben. And so we created a fake Mac 50. So the actor was using a replica. And then backstage with a microphone, there was a technician who had this fake Mac 15 that had, you know, something like, you know, the 30 whatever bullets a second. And he would, and the sound, you know, scared the living crap out of everyone. It didn't need, actually, it didn't have a mic. It was just the sound of it on itself. And, but of course, you know, guns are, you know, it's really hard to maintain. That you have to clean them all the time, and you know that it would fail. And then we had a backup with, you know, and yeah, I mean, I would say 25% of the time it would fail.
Wow.
And then we would use the cue, but when it didn't, it scared the crap out of everyone. So yes, guns are so complicated, you know, and they, you know, and some plays need the gun as, you know, you can't have the seagull without that gun at the end, right? That gun at the end, that you hear it off stage, you don't see it.
Yeah.
So there's like, if the sound doesn't work, you don't know that he killed himself, right?
Right.
So you know, so.
Oh, and also Doll's House. There's a door slam. Same thing. If you don't hear that, then, you know, it's the punctuation at the end of the play. So yeah, it was kind of devastating. I actually left through the stage door. I didn't go to the reception that night. I was so bummed.
Oh no!
I was so bummed, Michelle.
But it's not your fault.
No, it wasn't my fault. It felt like it though at the time.
I bet
I was bummed.
Well,
but you know, then we did have a backup, and it actually had to use the backup a couple times. There was a CD player that just had the shot on it.
They existed back then, did they?
Yeah, it was a relic that they pulled out of storage.
I bet. Well, my friend, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think should we open? Do you have anything, or should we open it now to the Q&A section?
No, that'd be great. Let's do it.
All right. So Amy, famed South Florida stage manager, says, what is the hardest part of Tech Week for a sound designer, composer? Do you ever get quiet time? And if not, how do you work around that? That's funny, because the 10 out of 12 are for the actors. And then we all expect that the designers, while the actors are on break, I was like, yeah, could you have fixed this 2 cues so you don't have you're at 12 out of 12?
Yeah, you know, that's actually a good question. I don't get a lot of quiet time, but fortunately, the places that I work, I'm familiar with the space. So a lot of times I can kind of just, I have an idea what it's going to sound like, and I just need even if it's the first time we're running the cue in tech, I can just set the levels and be okay. Very rarely do I need, you know, hours and hours of quiet time. But sometimes it would definitely be nice, because when nothing sounds like what you expected to sound like, there's usually a problem. And if the problem isn't revealed until you start that 10 out of 12, then that makes for a really, really long day, because you're just stressed.
And so, you know, there's something of quiet time when you're on your own on an empty theater. How do you see when audiences come in the sound also changes dramatically, right? How do you?
Yeah, people say that. It hasn't been my experience that it changes that much. I think it does if you're doing, like, for example, if you're doing a musical and you're doing something that's really loud, the bodies, you know, we're all mass. We're like all big sound absorbers. Some bigger than others, but you know, that does add up in a room. We're like absorbing some of that sound. If anything, the people usually make a room sound better because you get less reflection. There's more absorption, which is what you want. Like if you're building a studio, you want to have a good amount of absorption in your studio so that you're not getting all those crazy reflections and echoes and things like that. If anything, when there's a full house, a lot of times it's not the mass, but it's the, you know, the general din that people make, you know, just the coughing, the unwrapping, the
Yep.
just the sum of
Breathing.
people
The breathing.
breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that means you'll have to increase your level globally to get the same experience as when the house is empty. So that's something that I would say most designers do frequently, is have to push up the master volume
A little bit.
when
Right.
there's a full house. But other than that, sometimes the subtle effects need a boost because, again, if you're laying in real gentle crickets and you have 500 people in a room, maybe it doesn't read at all.
That's right.
So those are things that you have to, you know, hopefully address in your one preview.
Wonderful. So the great Yair Sharf, who worked with me for decades in Venezuela, well, I'd say a full decade as a sound designer extraordinaire, is asking, are there examples of plays or shows where sound design takes a protagonist role? Where some plays or where sound is really, almost another character of the play.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind, um, usually the darker plays, like the production of Dracula that Zoetic did recently. That was one where, without loud sound that was intended to scare, in a lot of cases, that's usually what it is. Sound is generally meant to shock in those scary plays like that. So that's one that came to mind. But I'm sure there are. I don't know that I've worked on one in some time because I can't really think of anything. Usually it's I'm sure she knows too. It's the opposite. Usually you just want to not be the protagonist, and if you're the protagonist, maybe you're trying too hard. Um,
Yeah. So another question from Yair is, what was the name of the standalone audio editor?
oh, that's a great question too. I love this program. It's called Twisted Wave, and I want to say for the Mac, it's probably $60 or $70. It's just a 2-track editor. It zooms it zooms and zooms out with your trackpad, so you can go real quick with just 2 fingers like that, which is awesome. And it does everything that you would need in a 2-track editor that you might pay $400 for. So I strongly recommend this program, Twisted Wave. I'm
And
not sure if it's on the App Store, but it's definitely
so
on there.
Claudia just shared the link to that on the chat section. So that's a place to see it. So the great Bill Hirschman, legendary reviewer of South Florida theater, is asking, how early or late do you get involved in a production's development and track your involvement as the production evolves?
Hey Bill, how you doing? That's a great question. We generally start whenever production meetings start happening for a show, we'll be looped in to those meetings. I will say, I don't know if it's the experience of other sound designers, but generally sound kind of comes a little bit later in the pecking order. I mean, costumes generally need to be addressed even before sound because there's more work usually. Also, obviously, the set that happens way before the sound designer gets involved. Usually when there's a model of a set, that's when would be the probably approximately the first time a sound designer might be involved. So like that first production meeting. And then we kind of fade away for a little while things get underway, unless it's a particularly heavy sound show. Or if there's choreography that needs to be edited early
Right.
so that the actors have something to rehearse with. And I have done shows where some directors want basically they want like a teched version of the show for rehearsals. So fortunately that doesn't happen too often, but you know, you try to accommodate as best you can for that stuff. It does inform a lot of what the actors are doing, but you know, for me, I would say it's better left to tech.
Right.
But yeah, so then once you know that I would say my busiest week is that week before tech rehearsals start, because that's when I'm building. So I come in with a show, at least a skeleton, if not more, that I can just set levels and not be the one that everyone's waiting on when we get to tech.
Very nice. So Amy has a follow-up question. How do you manage team expectations? What if someone doesn't like the sound cue, but you love it? What if the lighting isn't working with the sounds? Great questions.
Yeah, there's been maybe two times in my career where a director hated something that was awesome, you know, that was that you could categorize as universally awesome, where everyone in the room was like, that is kick ass, and the director said, nope, I don't like it. That's happened maybe twice. I remember them vividly, and I still to this day, like, they kind of both those blow my mind, that the aesthetic was so far off between the design team and the director.
Hmm.
But that doesn't happen very often, fortunately. But you know, the advice is you just don't get married to your sound cues until you have a reason to seal the deal. Like if the director doesn't like it, you know, they're probably it's actually better to hear that early, because what happens um, is if you convince a director that the cue's good and they say, okay, yeah, you're right. 4 or 5 days later, you're going to get asked about that cue again and you're going to have to change it. Like it's better just to know early, because even I can say this with almost 100% certainty. If they don't like it at the beginning, they're probably not going to grow to like it. So you kind of have to be ready to pull the plug on that one. And that's okay. You know, it's not a personal affront.
It's a great answer. So Margot says, I'm a huge fan, as you know. Have you ever gone back to see one of your shows after opening and felt different about the sound you design,
Yeah.
reflecting on the project?
Yeah. That's actually why I don't like to go back. Um, Opening nights are hard too, but at least you're used to it at that point, and you're kind of you're in the excitement of the opening week and all of that. When you go back later, um, it's almost always harder to watch and listen back. Like I second guess almost every cue.
Hmm.
The levels never. I'm never convinced like that the levels are the same, even though I know they're the same because it's automated. I'm like, I wouldn't have set that level. Someone messed with it.
That's
It's
how
not right.
we all feel every time we go back to see something we already opened. It's like, did we?
Yeah.
But you learn to live with you learn to live with that, or you don't go back to the theater, which is also maybe the wisest of choice. Uh,
There was one occasion I went back and there was actually a speaker that was out.
and nobody noticed.
No one really noticed. It was one of those things where you know it was there was a two subwoofer situation and one of them wasn't turned on. So I knew the moment I walked in, I was like, that's not right. But it's not enough to derail anything. It's just an extra sub. So um, yeah, I try not to think about stuff like that too
Good to
much.
go, I guess, every now and then to make sure that the speakers work and you'll get to hear the cows at the right moment.
Yeah. Well, you know, on Broadway, they send people on the tours, they send the directors, they check in constantly to make sure that like a syllable isn't being dropped from the script. Like they're really maniacal almost about the quality control. So
Yeah, it's a franchise. You know, the Big Mac needs to take the same taste the same in Manila or in New Jersey or in Fargo. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a franchise.
that always interested me. I always thought that was cool.
Well, we are very happy that you didn't go and across the country for months at a time and leave us here.
No, I love it here.
Yeah. So our good friend John Dalton is asking, following up with Bill's question, how do you collaborate with the lighting and set designer? What do the discussion entails? Are there meetings without the director? Can you meet with each designer and discuss how you can collaborate?
Yeah, sure. You know, it's nice if you have access to the director a lot and you can have all those conversations together. And generally, in a production meeting, you do have access to everybody. So, broader conversations, those are the best place to have those
Right.
so that you don't, you know, spend a lot of time spinning your wheels and doing something in a sidebar that isn't going to stick. Um, but yeah, once you're into the tech process, a lot of times in the first couple hours, you kind of see how a show or how a production is being styled by a certain director. So when you have downtime, you can work ahead a little bit because you can kind of sense, oh, this is one of those shows that doesn't have a lot of long fades, for example. So when you're working on transitions and you're working ahead, you can say, based on the information that you have from the beginning, you can sort of rough in what you're going to do in advance and be fairly sure that you're not going to do something that the director will hate. And they'll
Right.
still be able to tailor it when you get there, but at least you're always making progress and you're working ahead.
Yeah, and you know, and I think in a professional production, you know, I think you always get. I mean, hopefully, the job of the director needs to more or less bring everyone to the same world, to the same universe, and sort of if that is clear, then I think that the sidebar conversations can be fine. But if there's not a union of collaborators seeing the world in the same way, it's where absolutely things get tricky. So
And
another question from Yair Sharf is any thoughts on microphone placement on actors for musicals versus plays?
well, fortunately, I don't do a lot of body miking for the straight plays down here. The venues don't really need it, which is awesome because, man, talk about just another thing to go wrong. Um, you know, if we're being honest, that's one of the things I don't like about designing musicals is having to deal with the microphone situation. Um, they fail a lot. Wireless things generally fail. Um, they don't sound as good as a wired microphone, but they're getting better. And yeah, for any situation, the best placement for a microphone is the closest that you can get. Well, I'll say 90% of the time, it's as close as you can get to the source. So whatever is going to allow that microphone capsule to be the closest to the mouth for a musical. For a straight play, if you're just using for reinforcement, you probably don't need to be quite as um, adherent to that. But I prefer rather that like I see a lot of the ones that are up in the wig. That's not for my taste. That's not close enough to the mouth. Like I'd rather have if you can get away with it. I'd rather have the one that's right on the cheek.
You know, it's interesting, and this conversation with Yair reminded me of, you know, mistakes happen, right? And when there's a lighting mistake, nobody, maybe not even the director will realize that there was a lighting mistake. You know, maybe the cue went a little
Hmm.
early. There's a sound mistake. The usher, like everyone knows that there's a sound mistake. Like you can't,
Yeah,
pum, pum, pum. You know what happens with microphones?
yeah,
Hide a sound mistake. And so, you know, sound designers have, you know, much worse, nerves and experience of because their mistakes are ridiculously known to everyone. Whereas a lighting design or even a set mistake, like you can get away with nobody noticing it. But oh man, you sound designers really suffer when the mistakes that happen. Because you rely on technology. You're not, as you said, microphones fail. That's what they do. They're very
Right.
good at failing, right?
Microphones fail, computers fail, like everything fails. And even if you have a redundant setup, which, let's face it, not very many places do
Right.
have the budget to double mic everybody.
Yep.
Even so, you don't have a heads up. You're not getting like a warning message that the mic is about to fail. You don't know it fails until you hear that sound that sounds like your Mac gun being shot in the place.
That's right. That's right. And then you still have like the seconds it takes to switch from one mic to the other. So, I mean, there's
Yeah.
and then reviewers would say it was a great show with some minor technical sound issues, and you you probably want to strangle them. But listen, Bill, it's not personal. Um, eh, Margie, our good friend Margie, is saying, joining late. So Matt, have you talked about this? But can he talk about the influence the text with his original music about the influence? So his music of A Doll's House was stunning and so original. What was the influence? How? What is the process for you?
Oh, well, A Doll's House was cool because, of the time period. I knew that, I wouldn't be able to. I have a room full of synthesizers here, which I love to use, and they're the basis of about 90% of everything that I compose. In the instances where you're doing a classic, you know that you're probably going to be in the classical realm, which is my, what I went to school for. I'm a bassoonist by trade. So that was an opportunity to write something in a classical form, and I used a string quartet to do that.
And did you record the string quartet, or was it all computer?
It was all computer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You,
Not ideal. I would have loved to record it, but
right. I mean, those are, I think, sometimes, you know, it'll drive you crazy that you know that it's computer sound, and you think everybody can see that it's computer sound, but like almost nobody has that trained ear, and it totally worked. The difference is like a few $1,000s or more to get the real thing.
yeah. And then there's the time factor too, like where let's say you record the string quartet and
Now
um
be longer.
yeah, exactly. And that happened in that production. We had to end up extending things and looping things. And when you use a computer to compose, usually you get to work in a grid, and there's a tempo that's assigned to the grid. So if you're in synthland, if you're at 42 seconds and you want to go to 50 seconds, you can do that with tempo very easily, and it doesn't change the quality of the sound at all. Whereas if you're in audio, in a recording that's already happened, and you try to stretch or compress audio, that starts to leave artifacts on the sound. So you can get away with it up to about 10% in either direction, but you'll definitely start to hear a graininess that happens. So that's kind of heartbreaking too. If you have to stretch audio that you've meticulously recorded, it starts to degrade the quality. And so that's one of the perks of working in the digital workstation.
Well, we have the final questions for now. If anybody wants to ask a question, this is the moment. Good info on Mike. What brand of headphones does Matt use? What a great question. We all want to know. What
I'm
are oh,
I'm a fetishist with headphones. I have like every brand. It's the one thing I collect. These are AKG. These are kind of my favorites at the moment. I thought they had a number on them. These were a value. They're I can get the exact model. I love these headphones. They're, I think, $149. They come with 3 different cables. So you have the stretchy cable, the straight cable, and another third cable. So for me, it's awesome because I can have these cables throughout the studio and then just unclick it and then pop it in a different location, which is great. Highly recommend these. They sound awesome, but better yet, they're accurate. So whenever if you have to mix on headphones, these would be a great choice. I also have the ubiquitous Sony 7506 headphones. I have a set of Audio Technica headphones. I have my AirPods, my Beats, everything. Like I have a Sony noise canceling pair that's the only pair that does the noise canceling, but I love them. I kind of have a headphone for every purpose, so I absolutely love them.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, my friend, I think, and there Claudita shared the AKG headphones. Thank you, Claudita. You're amazing on the chat. So there are no more questions. I think this is the end of a extraordinarily wonderful conversation, eye-opening and ear-opening. I'm sure that a lot of people who heard the great Matt Corey will come and see a play with a different light or a different soundscape, and really seeing the work. Sometimes, again, actors get a lot of the credit, the lighting, but sometimes those subtle designers that can make or break. They're always doing their best when they're sort of like a referee, where you don't even, a good referee is one that you forget that he's there. And I think a good sound designer, sometimes it's one that you forget that he's there, that at no point were you distracted. Like if you're thinking too much about the sound, then the sound so there's something wrong with the sound. There's something wrong with the choices, because sound is there in the same way with light. Like the moment you're like, oh, this light cue is extraordinary, then you're not thinking, you're not paying attention to the story. That is also a problem.
I think, it's a personality thing too. Like for me, I know I probably err too far sometimes on the subtle side, and I think maybe it's served me well, because I tend to I'm not a recluse or anything like that, but I'm also not craving the spotlight. So I like to be behind the scenes, and I like for my work and the sound design to be supportive and part of that team, but I don't really care to be noticed all that much. So it suits me. I love it. I love that part of it. So a lot of times the director will have to push me to make things louder or to make things more supportive than I would like. But I think that overall has been a good thing, because of what you just said. Like you don't want the sound to get in the way.
All right. Well, my friend, you opened the way for us today. This was an extraordinary conversation. Give your parents all my best, and your wife. We can't wait to see her again on stage at the Colony Theater as soon as we open. We'll return with A Wonderful World, a play that she appears in, and she's, by the way, amazing, extraordinarily funny. She's just outstanding.
And she's a sweetheart.
And she's a sweetheart. She's, this man knows how to surround himself with great people. The way he chose his parents, that was brilliant, really.
Brilliant.
Such a good choice on your behalf. Anyways, you can see this, if you like this conversation, you want to share it with your friend, colony.org, go to MasterMiND and to the archives, and tomorrow it's going to be there as a first choice in the archives. There are now over 140 hours of classes, and I encourage you to go there and listen to them. I'll give a shout out again for our recent history classes on Shakespeare, on the Greeks, and on Chekhov. They were just outstanding, and this conversation definitely is there in the Parthenon of great conversations. So my friend, Thank you so much. Thank you
Hey,
so
it's my
much.
pleasure to be here. I love this, and I love that you're doing this. And I really, I can't think of a better way to spend a Thursday afternoon. This is great.
Very good. And we look forward to our future collaboration together. And to everyone else, stay safe, wear a mask. And if we all do that, we'll be back in the theater sooner than we think.
Amen.
Corey, once again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.
Bye.